A great house does not hide its shames in cellars. Cellars are for things nobody wants. It puts them in the attic, 3 floors up, over the best rooms, where the sound of the party comes through the boards, and the shame can hear exactly what it is missing. When the Duke of Marchmont was expected at Windhollow for 2 nights in September, Lady Sowerby had her niece carried up to the box room with a cold pie and turned the key. It was meant to be a small, tidy cruelty. Over by Thursday. She had forgotten what a lath and plaster ceiling does with a voice. So had the girl. But the girl had been singing up there for 9 years to keep the rats company, and on the second night, she forgot to stop. Windhollow Grange sat in a fold of the chalk downs, with beech woods on 3 sides, and it had been built for show in a county that had stopped watching. 40 windows, 9 of them lit. Ruth Carew was 23 years old and had lived in that house since she was 14, when her father's brig went down off the Skerries with her father in it, and the debts came home without him. Lady Sowerby was her mother's sister. She had taken Ruth in with a great deal of public feeling, and then priced the arrangement privately, at nothing a year, a bed over the kitchen stair, and whatever was left in the linen press when her own daughters had finished with it. Ruth kept the still room, the linen, the preserving, and the household daybook, because Lady Sowerby found figures tiring. She had 2 cousins. Honoria was 26, and beautiful in the finished, unsurprised way of a woman who has been told so daily since she was 6. Cassandra was 24, and had been taught to sing by a master from Naples at 11 guineas the quarter, and could do it, and made certain everyone knew what it had cost. The letter from Marchmont's man of business came in August. His Grace would break his journey at Windhollow on the 14th and 15th, 2 nights, and hoped the family would not put themselves to trouble. The family put itself to a great deal of trouble. There were 14 guests invited, a hired cook from Salisbury, and an argument about the seating that ran 4 days. On the morning of the 14th, Lady Sowerby came into the still room, where Ruth was straining quince, and stood in the doorway with her hands folded. "You will keep upstairs while His Grace is here," she said. "I had assumed so, Aunt. I mean, the box room, not your own. Bishop will carry up a pie and a jug, and there is a chamber pot." "It is 2 nights," Ruth set down the muslin. "May I ask why the door must be locked? Because I know you, Ruth. You are quiet, and you are watchful, and men notice quiet women when there are loud ones in the room, and I will not have this house wondering who the plain one is. Honoria has 1 season left in her." She said it entirely without heat, the way a woman reads out a bill. "You are not being punished. You are being kept out of the light." "I am aware," Ruth said. "The quinces want another 40 minutes, or the whole batch will turn to syrup. I will write the time on the slate." She washed her hands, took off her apron, folded it, and walked up 3 flights ahead of Bishop the footman, who carried the pie and would not look at her. The box room was under the roof at the north end, 12 feet by 9, with a dormer that opened 4 inches on a bar. There were 19 trunks in it, a broken pier glass, a chair with 2 legs, and the smell of hot slate, mouse, and old wool. The key turned at 11 in the morning. Ruth sat down on the largest trunk, ate a third of the pie, because 2 nights is 2 nights, and put her hand flat on the floorboards to feel the house working underneath her. She had been coming up here of her own accord since she was 15. It was the only room in the building that nobody wanted, and that made it the only room in the building that was hers, and she had spent 9 years singing into the rafters of it, because there was nobody to tell her not to. Idris Vane, 4th Duke of Marchmont, arrived at 4 in the afternoon on horseback, 9 miles ahead of his own carriage, wet to the shoulders, and in a temper he was too well bred to show. He was 35. He was heavy through the shoulders, and moved as though the left knee had been broken and set by somebody in a hurry, which it had, at Corunna, when he was 22, and a second son, with no expectation of anything. His brother had died of a fever 4 years ago, and left him a title, 6 estates, and an income that everyone in England wished to be introduced to. He had come to Windhollow because it lay between 2 places he actually cared about, and because his aunt had written that the Sowerby girls were worth a look, and he had stopped bothering to argue with his aunt. Dinner was 14 at table, and ran to 9 courses. Honoria sat on his right, and was beautiful at him for 2 hours. Cassandra sang afterwards in the yellow drawing room, 3 Italian airs at the top of her voice, every note of it correct and every note of it aimed, and he sat with his hands on his knees and his jaw set, and thought about how far it was to Devizes. He had spent 4 years in the peninsula. He did not want accomplishment. He wanted a room in which nobody was performing. At 1:30 he could not sleep. The knee ached in wet weather, and the bed was too soft, and the house was making the small tickings that strange houses make. He got up and stood at the window with the casement open, and through the ceiling, from somewhere above and to the north, came a voice. It was not loud. It was not aimed at anybody. Whoever it was singing quite softly to herself in the dark, an old thing with a modal turn in it that he half knew from the fishing villages, and she was singing it badly in one sense and perfectly in another, because she was not trying to be heard. There was no reach in it. There was no display. There was a woman 3 floors up, in an unheated room, amusing herself. Marchmont stood with his hand on the window frame and listened for 11 minutes, and something in his chest that had been braced since dinner came unbraced. Then it stopped, and he heard, very faintly, the sound of somebody laughing at herself for having started. In the morning, he asked about the arrangement of the house. Lady Sowerby said the north attics were empty and used for boxes. He said he had been under the impression there was a servant sleeping up there. She said there was not. Cassandra observed that the house made noises in the wind, and that she herself had been quite unable to sleep. Marchmont said nothing at all, and made a note of the north end and the number of chimneys, and after breakfast he walked the outside of the building in the rain, and counted windows, and found a dormer at the north end with a bar on it, and a face going quickly back from the glass. He went upstairs. He went up the back way, past a startled housemaid, because a duke may go anywhere and nobody dares to ask, and he stood in front of a locked door under the roof and did not knock at once. "There is a key on a nail by the linen press," said the voice through the door, not loudly. "Second nail." "It is the one with the wire on it. If you would rather not, I am not in any difficulty. I have a pie." Marchmont went and got the key. He opened the door and found a woman in a grey stuff gown, sitting on a trunk with her hands in her lap, 12 feet by 9, 19 trunks, cold as a church. She did not stand up, and she did not cry, and she did not explain. "Your Grace," she said. "You were singing," he said. "Yes." "Why did you stop?" "Because I remembered where I was." She looked at him steadily. "You will want to go down. It will be worse for me if you are found on this floor." Marchmont looked at the chair with 2 legs. Then he took his own weight off the bad knee, went out onto the landing, came back carrying a sound chair from the passage window, and set it down inside the door. "Sit," he said. "You are on a trunk with a lock plate in it, and it has been cutting into you for an hour." Ruth Carew looked at the chair for a moment longer than she meant to. Nobody in that house had brought her a chair in 9 years. She sat down on it. "Now," Marchmont said, staying standing, "tell me who locked you in, and do not soften it." She did not soften it, and she did not embroider it. It took 4 minutes. He asked what she did in the house, and she told him that too, in order, with the quantities. Preserving, linen, the still room, the household daybook. He asked how much she was paid, and she said nothing, and he asked again, in case she had misunderstood the question, and she said she had not. When he had gone, she sat and looked at the chair, and felt something in her chest that she distrusted very much, and she put it away where she put things. He did not have her let out. That was the part Lady Sowerby never understood afterwards. He simply came back at 4 with a candle and the household daybook under his arm, which he had asked for at the study door, in a voice that did not admit questions, and he sat down on the trunk and gave Ruth the chair and said, "Explain this to me." "It is only the daybook, Your Grace." "It is 4 years of your handwriting, and I have been looking at the coal." So she explained the coal. Windhollow bought 40 chaldrons a year through a factor at Newbury and paid £1.11 the chaldron when the pit price at the wharf was 19 shillings, and the difference had been going somewhere for 6 years, and it came to something over £240. She had written it in the margin in pencil in the second year and been told not to be clever. She showed him the same pattern in the malt, in the candles, and in the hire of the carriage horses, which the house did not own and paid for 11 times a quarter. "You have known this for 4 years, Marchmont said. "Yes," and said nothing. "I said it twice. The second time, my aunt took away the ink." Ruth turned a page. "Your Grace, I am not being noble. I am being poor. A woman with no money, who accuses her own aunt of theft in her aunt's house, is a woman sleeping in a hedge by Friday. So I wrote it in pencil and waited to see who would ever read it. And here I am," he said. "And here you are," she agreed. "Though I did not expect a duke, I had rather hoped for an auditor." Marchmont made a sound that was not quite a laugh and seemed surprised by it. He came back the next night, and Windhollow discovered on the 3rd morning that his Grace had extended his stay, and on the 5th that he had sent to Devizes for his own man of business, and by the 2nd week of October the family had stopped being able to explain to itself what was happening. Ruth was let out of the box room on the 16th, because there was no longer any point to it. She went back to the still room. She kept the linen. She wrote in the daybook in ink, because the ink came back the day after the coal conversation, without anybody saying why. And in the evenings, the Duke sat in the still room with his bad leg out straight in front of him and read a state correspondence while she worked, and neither of them talked much. And once she looked up and found him asleep in the chair. He asked her one night, without preamble, "Where did you learn to sing like that?" "I did not learn. My mother sang while she worked, and I copied her." She strained the muslin. "It is not singing, Your Grace. Cassandra sings. I make a noise to myself, in an empty room, to keep the rats company. Cassandra performs," Marchmont said. "It is a different trade entirely, and I have had 4 years of it in drawing rooms, from here to Lisbon." He looked at the fire. "I was under a wall at Corunna for a night and a day. Since then I cannot abide a room where somebody is aiming at me." "Then you have chosen your house badly. I am aware," he said, and this time it was a laugh, rough and startled, as though something rusted had been turned over. The Dowager Lady Trant came in November. She was Lady Sowerby's cousin, 68, and she came with a solicitor and Lady Sowerby 2 steps behind her, and she found Ruth in the still room with her sleeves to the elbow. "So this is the person," she said. "Your Grace, I shall be direct, as the county has been direct with me for a month. There is a penniless dependent under this roof who has been alone with you in a locked wing since September, and a duke's name is not a thing to be spent on a still-room girl. She goes to her mother's people in Bristol on Thursday, and there is the matter of what this family's reputation has cost." Marchmont came off the window seat with something in his face. Ruth put 2 fingers on his sleeve. "Sit down," she said. "This will not take long." She dried her hands and took the daybook off the shelf and 3 loose papers out of the back of it. "Lady Trant, before we come to my character, this house has bought its coal for 6 years, through a factor at Newbury, at £1.11, the caldron against a wharf, price of 19 shillings. That is £241. It has hired carriage horses 11 times a quarter, and owns 4. And the factor at Newbury is a Mr. Petherick, who banks at Marlborough, and who has paid £40 a year, for 6 years, into an annuity." She laid the papers on the table and turned them so the room could read them. "The annuity is in your name, my lady. It is why you have come. Not for my aunt's reputation, for the 12th payment, which fell due on Michaelmas and has not been made, because his Grace's man of business stopped it in October." The solicitor examined the floor with great attention. In the doorway, Bishop the footman stood with a tray and did not move an inch. Lady Sowerby had gone the color of tallow. "You are a still-room girl," Lady Trant said. "I was cheaper than looking," Ruth said. "This house has been paying for that for 9 years. The door is behind you, my lady. Mind the sill. It swelled in the wet, and nobody has ever taken a plane to it." They went. Nobody was prosecuted, because Ruth asked that nobody be. And Marchmont never entirely understood it, and never entirely stopped thinking about it. The county said the Duke of Marchmont had lost his reason, and said it for about 6 weeks, and then said instead that his Duchess had found £240 in a coal bill with a pencil, and that a wise man did not send an account to that house twice. He asked her in the still room in December, with the quinces going and his leg out straight. He did not kneel, because kneeling would have made it about him. "I have a house that is too large, a knee that predicts weather, and 6 estates that have been managed by men I have never checked," he said. "You have looked at one-day book and found more than my agents have found in 4 years. That is not a proposal, Your Grace. That is an offer of employment. It is both, and you may refuse either half." Ruth put down the muslin. She found she wanted to be asked for something practical, so she named 3. That bishop be given the character he had been refused twice, since he had carried a pie up 3 flights for 9 years and looked away out of shame and not out of malice. That she keep the still room and the books and be answerable for them properly, with her name in the front. And that nobody in any house of his ever be housed in a room without a key. "Done," Marchmont said. "All 3. What do you want for yourself?" "A window that opens more than 4 inches, Ruth said. 4 years on, the north attics at Marchmont's own house were floored, plastered, and let to the housekeeper's mother, who liked the light. Lady Sowerby lived at Bath on an allowance, and told a version in which she had been shamefully used. Honoria married a man with a great deal of money, and no conversation. Cassandra sang at 11 guineas the quarter, at other people's parties, and was much admired. On a wet evening in October, Ruth stood at the top of the house with the casement wide, and sang quietly to herself to keep the rats company, badly in one sense and perfectly in another. And 3 floors below her, a man with a bad knee stopped on the stair, and stood still with his hand on the rail, and listened, because he was allowed to now. A great house puts its shames in the attic, so they can hear what they are missing. It never once occurs to anybody that the attic can be heard from, as well as heard in. If Ruth's 9 years of pencil in a margin got you the way it got me, you know what to do. Hit that like button, and send this one to somebody who has been kept out of the light in a house they were holding up. Subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another of these long historical dramas, and tell me down in the comments, what was the moment you knew she had already won? Was it the key on the nail, the chair he carried up, or the coal? I will see you in the next one.